We're so fortunate to have Sue Burton help us set the stage for today's summit by offering her perspective as a grandparent caregiver. Sue Burton serves as the lead community contact and grandfamilies facilitator for Lincoln County Schools, where she supports family and community engagement through federal programs. As a family engagement facilitator for Healthy Grandfamilies, a free statewide initiative housed at West Virginia State University, she helps connect grandparents raising grandchildren with essential resources, education, and support. Since launching the local chapter in 2017, Sue has played a vital resource in serving a network that now reaches more than 4,000 families across every county in West Virginia. Drawing from her own lived experience raising two grandsons, she brings deep empathy, resilience, and dedication to every family that she serves. Sue Burton was also a key member of REL Appalachia's Supporting Students, Grandfamilies, and Kinship Caregivers Community of Practice, and it's my privilege to introduce you to Sue Burton.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sue Burton. I am currently the family/grandfamily engagement facilitator for Lincoln County Schools in Hamlin, West Virginia. Um, I can relate to this program tremendously, the West Virginia Grandfamilies program, because I was a grandfamily. I raised two of my grandsons who are now doing very well in the community. And I also have great grandchildren now. And when I was raising them, there wasn't anything out there to help. I hadn't heard of anything. And how I heard about the Grandfamilies program was I was working for Lincoln County Schools, and I heard that there was going to be a lady up there at the Civic Center in Charleston who would be talking about grandparents raising their grandchildren, and I was very much interested in it. So I went up to the Civic Center and I chose to go into that one particular speaking engagement where Bonnie Dunn was talking about the Grandfamilies program. And after the program, I asked to speak with her, and she and I talked for a while, and I said, this is something I really want to bring to Lincoln County. So I came back and we connected, and I brought the program to Lincoln County. We started off with 8 grandfamilies, and I now have 105 in my program today. That changes weekly. And I know it's the tip of the iceberg because there are so many grandparents in Lincoln County and other counties that are raising the grandchildren. And I'm trying to reach out to those in different ways. I go to preschool registrations and I find some of them there. And then I go to family activities and I find some of them there. And then I'm also getting referrals from counselors, social workers, teachers about these grandparents who are raising their grandchildren. So in my program, I actually am grant funded except for a small amount we get from the legislature. And with that funding, I do lots of things for our grandfamilies, anywhere from food and clothing for the grandchildren to paying utilities and car repair. So we offer a lot of services for them. Being a grandmother raising grandchildren, I can tell you it was a struggle. I can't imagine me starting again at this age, like a lot of our grandparents in Lincoln County here do. Um, that would be a real struggle. I started a long time ago, actually 24 years ago, raising my grandchildren. And just when I thought I had got my son raised and we had an empty nest, wasn't long. My first grandson was actually less than a year old whenever I started keeping him. And his brother came later, and when his brother was a year and a half old, I started keeping him as well. So I raised both of them, and I'm very proud to say that they are very well-rounded, great boys. Um, so this stigma that a lot of people have with kids being raised by their grandparents, it's not true. These kids turn out to be very good kids most of the time. I'm not saying there's not any struggles with raising them, especially when they're teenagers, but I think they are much better off being raised by their grandparents than being raised in a foster system or wherever. But just a little background on my experience. Um, the only things that I was concerned about when I had them was, uh, is my health going to stay well enough to get them raised? Um, is my finances going to hold up well enough for me to supply what they need? Because back then I had no help. The only thing I did receive was SNAP benefits for both the grandchildren, but I received nothing else. So, needless to say, and I always say this, I ate a lot of peanut butter so that my boys could be involved in sports. It's what we do as grandparents, we sacrifice. So I feel that I'm very blessed to be able to have this job and to do something that I absolutely love doing, and that's helping these grandparents to take care of their grandchildren. So I feel like God put me in this position, and I hope to retire here someday in this position. So that's my story. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me. I put my information in the chat box. And I want to thank you all for having me, and thank you all so much for listening to my story.
Thank you so much, Sue, for sharing your experiences and also for all the work that you're doing to support grandfamilies.
Thank you, Kirby.
And thank you so much for joining us. So next, we'd like to focus on understanding the growing need to support kinship caregivers and grandfamilies from a national perspective. And before I introduce you to our next speaker, I just want to direct your attention to page 2 of the Action Planning Workbook as a place where you can jot down reflections, key takeaways, and action steps. So we are so thrilled to have Ana Beltran with us today. Ana Beltran is an attorney and the director of the Grandfamilies and Kinship Support Network, a national technical assistance center at Generations United. Ana is a national expert on grandfamilies, authoring several Generations United publications on the subject and publishing articles in various academic journals. Ana has spoken extensively about relatives raising children at national, state, and local conferences. And as someone who was raised in part by her grandmother, Ana has a personal commitment to the families. Ana also played a very key role in offering her expertise to REL Appalachia's community of practice. And it's my honor to introduce you to Ana Beltran.
Thank you so much. Good morning. And thank you, Sue, for sharing your personal story and for all you do. Thank you for everyone on this call, actually, and all you do for kinship. I know there are so many of you who are families yourselves or work with the families every day and know that we deeply value what you do. I'm here to give you kind of a national overview and to share kind of to create a baseline so that we all have the same kind of information about the families. And just a little bit about what we do here at the Grandfamilies and Kinship Support Network. We are the first and only National Technical Assistance Center focused on the families, and we support professionals like you all in the schools who work with the families and who want assistance in identifying best practices or resources or whatever you need. And all of our assistance is free of charge, thanks to our federal support through the Administration for Community Living at HHS. So that's our website there on that slide so that you can see it. We, like REL Appalachia, share the same definition. So we use kinship families and grandfamilies interchangeably to mean grandparents and other relatives and close family friends who raise children when parents can't. And you'll see that we have a glossary on this, linked on this page, and we define a lot of terms because these families intersect with so many systems in addition to education. And like Sue pointed out, the difficulty of navigating all of this and identifying who can help is really what we're here to do, is to break down some of those silos and have systems talk to each other and work together. So I'm going to share now a brief video, 2-minute video, just to kind of give you a feeling. And I do want to tell you right out of the bat that you're welcome to use this video, to link to it on your websites if you find it helpful, and to share it in your communities.
Across the U.S., about 2.5 million children are being raised by their grandparents, other relatives, or close family friends. These caregivers step up when parents are unable to raise their children, forming families known as kinship families or grandfamilies. Now, while the challenges some of these families face are similar to parent-headed families, there are fundamental differences. Unlike parents, who have automatic legal rights and responsibilities for their children, kin caregivers do not. They also did not expect to raise these children. They often step up to raise them at a moment's notice and during a crisis, like a parent's death. As of that moment, caregivers need authority to make decisions for the child, like enrolling them in school, and often need a court to grant a legal relationship, all of which takes time and money. Even with a legal relationship, the practical issues can be overwhelming. Like, where will the child sleep? Grandma may live in adult-only senior housing. Despite these challenges, decades of research prove that children thrive with kin. Generations United has been working on behalf of these families for over 25 years. As part of our work, and guided by kin caregivers and other experts, we run the only federally funded National Technical Assistance Center on the families, the Grandfamilies and Kinship Support Network. If you work at a government agency, school, or small or large nonprofit organization, we're here to help you better support the families. Visit www.gksnetwork.org to learn more.
Well, so that just gives you a kind of a brief overview, but those are the big challenges that these families face that is distinct from parent-headed families, that they lack an automatic legal rights and responsibilities for the children they're raising, and they often, initially, and that they often step up in a moment's notice. And so they come to the school sometimes in that crisis situation to try to enroll the children in school. But let me turn a little bit first to the children in these families. And I know Kirby already touched on this, but so you have a visual here. There are so many more children being raised by kin outside of foster care involvement than within foster care involvement. So there's about one child being raised by kin in foster care for every 19 children outside of foster care. And this is nationally. So the foster care system really does rely on kin for placements, and 39% of all children in foster care are now with relatives and kin, but the vast majority are like Sue, and they have not, they're not caring for the children in foster care. And foster care facilitates, as you all well know, a lot of these educational challenges. But for those families and those children outside of that involvement, they don't have necessarily help to navigate all of this. But why are we seeing these increases in children within foster care, and why do we promote kinship care and grandfamilies and try to support them? Because there's, as the video pointed out, decades of research that show that these children really do thrive in the care of their kin, particularly when they're well supported by schools and others. So this is just a brief infographic that kind of shares many of those positive outcomes, some of which are common sense, like connected to their siblings, connected to their culture. That's pretty obvious to all of us. But then there are those better educational outcomes, better health outcomes, better behavioral health outcomes that aren't as obvious, but that have been documented. So know this exists, and there are those links at the bottom of the page, and I'm sure you'll be getting these slides. What about the caregivers? Well, the vast majority are like Sue, their grandparents. This is a new chart on the left from the Government Accountability Office. We don't usually have this kind of data, but we know that the vast majority are grandparents who are caring for these children, but there are other relatives, and there are non-relatives, and there may be other relatives that almost look like a child. We had an employee here who was 22 years old, and she had to start kin caregiving her 16-year-old sisters. And she was struggling with the school because they were like, wait, you just graduated a few years ago. Who are you? But she was able to navigate that. So just know that these caregivers come in all ages and all colors and shapes and sizes. So it's a vast rainbow out there of who these caregivers are. We know more about the grandparents who are responsible for the grandchildren than those other caregivers, just because of the way the U.S. Census Bureau collects and reports data. And we do know that among the grandparents, the majority are 60 and older, and a good 25% of them have some kind of disability. So, keeping that in mind as you're doing the outreach and the supports of these families. Now, the challenges, which, the video did touch on a little bit, which is that lack of legal relationship when you're caring for one of those 19 children outside of foster care involvement. So that lack of automatic legal rights and responsibilities over that child, often the sudden nature of this caregiving, and then just the lack of identification with these terms. I mean, I know that most of you have served families who are like, what's a kinship family? They are one, but they don't identify with that term. And nobody asks them necessarily, because maybe they look like a parent, they're a similar age, but they're not the parent. And that comes with its own level of strengths and challenges. So Lori elevates some of that, which is that, yeah, we often get asked as caregivers if we're a parent or guardian. Well, in many states, the guardian relationship doesn't even exist. So that term means nothing. And they're often not the guardian. They may be the adoptive parent, but still they have needs that are distinct from other birth parents and adoptive parents. Or they may have legal custody or have some kind of temporary caregiving relationship. Or maybe they've enrolled the child and they've come to you with an educational consent law, which many states have, and I will share those with you. Those laws that I just mentioned are in this 5 actions for supporting the families on the left. I just wanted to share an image with you of it so you know what it looks like, and it is on our website. Everything we do is free of charge, so know that you can access that. And then in the appendix, we list those educational consent laws and where they are. And then on the right is a brochure that we have. It's just a very simple 4-page brochure. To really elevate these families to people in schools and school districts, et cetera, who don't necessarily know much about the families. So know that that's available to you to share with others as well. So what are the key themes? What are the key themes that we elevated in the toolkit that we're trying to address today that you all are going to talk about for the next couple of days in much more depth? The barriers. There are barriers to supporting the education of these children, but that the children have better educational outcomes than children raised with non-kin when they're supported, and that when they get access to critical supports, these families and children can thrive, and academic achievements of the children can soar. So kind of obvious themes, but we really want to elevate them. And also this interesting data point on the right, which is, that with that 2.5 million children being raised by grandparents and other relatives, and the number of public schools in the country, there's an average of at least 15 children in every public school in the country who are being raised by these families. And of course, that's just an average. We think the 2.5 million number is low because that's self-reported data, but there are a lot of them, and they're everywhere, and they may not identify it as a kinship family, but they're there, and we need to help identify them, welcome them, and support them. So that toolkit that I shared on the screen has 5 actions. And I'm going to briefly touch on all 5 actions today and just kind of give you a taste of what I know that you're going to delve into much more depth in the next 2 days. The first one is the enrollment forms, really looking at the enrollment forms. And I know this is not always possible because they're computer systems, it's very hard to do, but where possible, try to have your enrollment forms align with the legal relationship options for enrolling that child that exist in your state. And ask relationship information, not just parent or guardian or foster parent. With the foster parent choice, ask, are you related? Are you kin? Are you non-kin? With the parent, ask if they're a kinship caregiver or adoptive parent. So really trying to figure out who these families are, again, so that you can better support them. If that's not possible, and I know Virginia is here, and you'll probably be hearing much more about this, and I saw that the fabulous Form Families Forward is in this meeting, but just copying, sharing one of their forms, and providing some kind of school checklist so that the schools can work with the families in the best way possible, and that you know about them. Action 2, welcome each kinship family. So use information from the enrollment or from a form like the one I just shared from Virginia to welcome them and make them feel part of the community at the school. Consider creating a checklist, another fabulous resource from Virginia, about the families and what their preferred mode of communication is, and all those kinds of great questions. And then find out if there's a kinship navigator program in your community or another really strong kinship support service provider who can come in and help welcome the families, and you can connect them with the resources that they provide in the community. When designing school activities, like family trees, really consider the impact to all children. And this is more of a piece for the actual teachers. Include kin and Mother's Day and Father's Day activities and really be thoughtful about that. 25 years ago, and I really sincerely hope this has changed in most places, but I remember hearing the most, it was just heartbreaking story, and I know the teacher didn't mean it badly, but they were doing Mother's Day cards, and the teacher went up to this girl and said, "Oh, Susie, you don't need to worry about that. You don't have a mom." So just really being mindful about how we frame all these things, these activities, and then perhaps consider celebrating the kinship families in a unique way too. So including them in activities, but then consider adding a Grandparents' Day celebration or a Kinship Month celebration. And we have resources that can help you do that as well. Spreading awareness among the school faculty and staff, that's huge, and that's where you can tap that kinship navigator that may be in your community or another kinship service provider to come in and a lunch and learn, some brief thing, maybe just share the video and the strengths and challenges fact sheet that's linked on the bottom of one of those slides. But you're also welcome to use and share this Grandfamilies 101 that our partners at 0 to 3 created, which can kind of give people a brief introduction of the families and who they are and how they look differently than parent-headed families. I want to share these resources with you that you can share directly with the families. I'll elevate to the FAFSA one, which is the 4th bullet down. So that is a tip sheet that I'm particularly proud of because nothing else exists like it that I know of. And it really helps school counselors and kinship families, helps high school seniors complete that college aid financial application, because most children who are being raised by their relatives and kin can qualify as independent for financial aid purposes. So if you follow the instructions in there, it can open doors for these children. Action 3, using welcoming language in school communications. This is obvious, and I know that REL Appalachia has a fabulous chart on kind of terms you can use instead of saying parent, what you can say, and I know that they're going to delve into that in a breakout session, but just elevating, try to stay away from terms like mom, dad, try to use more family language, more inclusive language, because kin caregivers really often don't see themselves in that term. There might be a parent, they're just absent. So if something's directed at the parent, they don't think that's them. It's also true from the child's perspective. We have a partner in Ohio who shared this story, that, not this story, this concept that, we often send things back with the children to their home and address it sometimes as dear parent. And the children may see that and think, well, I don't have a mom and dad in the home, so I'm just going to throw this away. I'm not going to give it to grandma. So really thinking about how we frame school communication, and again, not limiting that language to parent or guardian. part of the special education process. So really including kinship families in that process, because we do know, again, from that government accountability report that came out in December, that a lot of children being raised by kin, more than in the general population, have some kind of special need or disability. And so they should be getting services and certainly access to the assessment process for those services. So really accepting referrals from them for those services and including them in the process of developing the individualized education plan or the 504 plan. And this is consistent with federal law. So federal law, and at Generations United, we worked hard for this language, and we know that not all jurisdictions necessarily do this, but know that federal law is behind you when you invite a kin or relative who's raising a child who's acting, as this phrase says, in loco parentis. Oh, I guess we didn't use that phrase, but in the place of, that when they're acting as the parent, that even if they don't have all the legal documentation, they should be part of that IEP process. And the surrogate parent process is separate, or is intended to be separate, for the foster care involved children. So know that this exists, and you can hang your hat on it if you need to within your own school. Finally, the last action, considering school-based supports. So there have been, because as Sue elevated, the best way to reach the families as kinship service providers is to go to the schools, and is to go to the pediatrician's offices, is to go to the child care centers, is to go where the caregivers go for the children. So that's the best way to find these caregivers, is to go where they go with the children. So in your case, for schools, I mean, it's such an important outreach mechanism for kinship service providers. And because it's such an important place for them and for the families, it can be really helpful to offer services to the families in the school. So having a school-based support group, which we've seen work in many communities. So, after school or after drop-off, having some kind of caregiver support group that's there where they're going to be anyway, and offering that service. Possibility of partnering with family resource centers. And, Kentucky, and I know you're going to talk with Kentucky. Kentucky has school-based family resource centers, and that's a huge asset for their communities. And we are partnering with the National Family Support Network, and we are getting ready to release some profiles of these kinds of school-based family resource center support. So that's a way to kind of partner and help support these families. And then in a Title I school, intentionally reaching out to grandparent and kin caregivers and getting their input on how the funds should be used is really important too. So not just talking to parents generically, but parents and kin caregivers and the families themselves. So I want you to stay connected with us. Again, all of our resources are free. All of our assistance is free. We have a monthly newsletter that goes out the third week of each month, and it comes into your inbox, and it has all things kinship. So we featured this summit in there last month. It doesn't just include our materials. And also we have a very active LinkedIn page where, again, we post things about kinship from around the country. And it's been my pleasure to be with you all today. And I know you're going to have such a rich 2-day discussion and hearing from the true experts, the caregivers, the people who are embedded in the schools and at the school-based community supports. So thank you.
So now we're going to shift focus to developing authentic partnerships with families. And I encourage you to turn to page 5 of your Summit Action Planning Workbook so you can jot down notes to reflect on your current practices and capture key takeaways from our next speaker, who I'm honored and thrilled to introduce. Brooke Gill is the National Director for Family-Friendly Schools and a seasoned leader in nonprofit and education initiatives focused on family and community engagement. Brooke has spent over a decade building partnerships, strengthening local leadership, and creating systems that really empower families as active partners in children's learning. Brooke's work emphasizes translating policy and practice into sustainable family-centered solutions that support student success. Known for her results-driven approach and bias to action, she brings deep experience in community schools, family engagement, and systems change, and is passionate about helping schools create environments where families feel valued, informed, and equipped to participate fully. I personally have had the honor of collaborating with and learning from Brooke over the years, and I'm eager to hear all that she'll share with us today. Please join me in welcoming Brooke Gill.
Yay, thank you so much. All right, so I'm here today to talk to you about family-friendly schools just a little bit. That's the program that we're running in Kentucky, and it'll go national in August. So you're one of the first groups to actually hear that phrase out loud. April 28th is when we're officially announcing that we're going national with our family-friendly schools model. So this is a little ahead of that, but we wanted to go ahead and take the opportunity to share really some of our learnings through decades of working with family leaders and understanding that dual capacity of building school partnership efforts and family capacity to lead alongside schools. So we can get going. Yep. So Pritchard Committee, if you haven't heard of us before, we've been around since 1980, and we have go back. Yeah. 1980 with a mission to realize a larger life for all Kentuckians with education at the core. The way we do that is through a process we call Study, Inform, Mobilize. So we study priority issues impacting Kentucky families and educators and community members. And then we inform all of those groups about what's happening in our education system. What is the data saying? What are our high points, low points? How do we stack up compared to other states across the nation? And then we mobilize individuals. What is jumping out to you, and what difference do you want to make in your community? And what do you need from us to make that happen? So sometimes that looks like printing out and educating folks about data, about what is a school report card. Sometimes it looks like walking alongside a parent at a school board meeting and helping them advocate for their child and all children. So it takes different forms at different times, but since 1983, that's what we've been doing across Kentucky. And a little bit about why am I here talking about family leadership? A little breakdown, and it was cool that Ana referred to the school-based decision-making boards, because that really begins the journey of Pritchard Committee and family engagement back in the 1990s, which was really before anybody was using the phrase family leadership or parent leadership. It wasn't really talked about mainstream like it is now. And we ensured that the Family Resource Use Service Centers and school-based decision-making boards made it into the Kentucky Education Reform Act. So it put that in statute that schools needed to have Family Resource Use Service Centers, and they needed to have 2 parents on every school-based decision-making board. So that was huge, which led a little time later to us supporting the Department of Education and formalizing family partnership standards. So it's hard to know what meaningful family engagement looks like, and a lot of the required language just uses the word meaningful. And schools have a hard time defining, are we doing it? Are we not doing it? What does that look like? So in 2007, we led the co-led the missing piece of the proficiency puzzle was the standards, the name of that document. That speared the national PTA standards rewrite, which was really an interesting piece of our history. So when the PTA saw these new family partnership standards, Ann Henderson, which some of you all may know, her work Beyond the Bake Sale, she was part of both. So she used the learnings from Kentucky to help inform those PTA standards. So in 2022, we looked into what does it look like to create really a celebration platform for family partnerships, similar to Blue Ribbon schools. We have a lot of awards out there for our academic achievements across our schools, but what we heard from educators and many family specialists that are in the room today, even when you do go above and beyond and you're doing that strong family partnership work, it doesn't get a whole lot of credit. And that makes it sometimes difficult to share best practices across schools because we're not lifting them up. We're not highlighting those practices like we do when math scores soar or chronic absenteeism. Somebody's found, a solution to that, and we all can look at those best practices. There really isn't that commonality in the nation for family partnership. So the Family Friendly Schools certification kind of builds on that standards and then creates this alignment that we're excited to share for celebrating best practices across the nation. All right, and then our theory of change is that family, community, and educator partnership leads to better student outcomes, which ensures that we have success post-high school, leading to improved quality of life, which just creates better partners. The cycle continues. So today, that's just a little bit about who we are and why we're here today, but wanted to use my 20 minutes with you all to hopefully put a couple tools in your toolbox about why maybe some of your family engagement efforts. I was excited to see all of the roles today. I think this is really going to apply to so many of you. It's not that you don't believe in family engagement. This is preaching to the choir, but many times we feel like we're just getting stuck. Like, why isn't it working? We're inviting them, they're not showing up. We're using all the right language. We're doing all of these things that we know is best practice. Yet still it's the same 10 parents, or it's just taking a whole lot of effort and we're not getting any deeper with the partnership beyond event attendance sometimes. So the first thing I want you to do on your scrap piece of paper or the worksheet that they referred to is think of one family engagement strategy that you're already doing, and you believe should be working, but it's not. So give me one of those that's stuck, not one that's doing exceptionally well, one that's stuck. What is the strategy supposed to do? And then a little bit about what is actually happening. So just a moment to reflect. I'll give you about 1 minute. Okay. This is one of our favorite tools, is applying the 4C check. So this comes from the dual capacity model. And we always ask folks to think of each strategy that you feel like should be working but isn't through the 4C checks. So did families at that literacy night, did they leave having built at least one new relationship with either another parent, grandparent, or someone at the school? So much so that they would maybe text them, email them. Did they leave with a new support system? Confidence. Did they leave feeling more confident to blank than they did before? So if it was a literacy event and you're teaching grandparents about reading to elementary schools and dialogic reading best practices or something, did they actually leave feeling more confident to do that thing than they did before? Capacity building is along with that. Did they leave at least with one new skill? So somebody said something about high school. So if you're teaching families how to support their high schoolers post-high school, did they leave having logged on to at least like 2 websites that can help them find scholarships or help them with things they need to do to be prepping their high schoolers? So did you build their capacity with an actual skill? And then cognition, did you get to that heart piece? Well, I can't help them find something after high school because I didn't go to college myself. Well, I can't help my kid read because I'm not a strong reader. So did we shift a belief system in the participants? Research shows that if these 4 things are happening, then the event is high impact. So if your event isn't hitting at least 2 of these C's, that is why it's most likely low impact, and why you're having low turnout or nothing's really coming from it, even if you're having high participation. So on the flip side of that, think about one of the activities that's having the most success. And can you see why you're having so much success? Probably because it's tending to all 4 C's. And we'll keep going. I love the 4C check. So the most common pitfalls we find with engagement strategies over the years is that we're trying to entertain our participants. They don't want to be entertained. They're tired. They worked all day. They got a messy house. They got to get dinner on the table, go to the groceries. Last thing they want to do is be entertained by the school. Like, if I want to be entertained, I'll go do something entertaining. So we do not want to always be trying to entertain. We need to think more about purpose. So if I'm coming to the school, it needs to be very meaningful to me. That doesn't mean that we're not relational, but you can be relational and highly purposeful. And sometimes we mix that in order to be relational, it needs to be a lot of fun. Pushing information out without a call to action. Once you push so much information out and grandparents and families get used to the fact that there's no ask at the end of this email, they stop reading it. And so if every 10th email does have an ask, then that's why nobody's following up. So if you're going to push information out, always try to couple it with a call to action so that families get used to, I need to read this because it's going to ask me to do something. Asking for feedback without clarity on change. This is a quick way to have a lot of momentum of getting families to the table, and then you lose them because their ideas actually aren't doable. So if you bring families to the table and you say, oh my gosh, what should we do with our family literacy night this year? And people start saying all of these ideas and you don't have the budget for it, leadership's not going to be open to all of that new thinking. And really, you were just asking what do they want to have for dinner. If you just want to know what they want to have for dinner, ask them what they want to have for dinner. So families express to us a lot that they get frustrated because they don't really know what piece of feedback that you really need from them. And constraints. We often assume in school world that families understand school world, especially this is important for this audience with grandparents. The school is very different than it used to be. And so we cannot assume that they have the institutional knowledge we have and understand why decisions are being made. So we hear a lot, well, why did they use the funding for that when they could have used the funding for this? And what a waste of money that is, not understanding that that's federal money that can only be used for transportation. We can't use this money for teacher raises. And when that's explained, we find families not only understand, but they become our number one allies and advocates because they say, well, that shouldn't be the case. And we're like, that's a great point. Would you like to write an op-ed? Would you like to speak to that? Because we agree with you, but we don't hold the power to change that. Next. So reframing the question, often I'll hear in trainings and with folks that'll say, we just can't get families more involved. And our question, what problem are you trying to solve with families? So we don't want to get families involved just to get grandfamilies involved. Our problem is that our chronic absenteeism is through the roof. So ask families, hey, our absenteeism just keeps climbing. We need your help. So come at it from a place of, we have this problem that affects these kiddos that we all love and care about. Can you help us think more about it? That reframes families as assets, not this other project that we've got to get to. Oh, we've also got to get to engaging those families. We haven't gotten to that yet. That's pointless for everybody. So why are you engaging families for what purpose? Informal leadership. I loved that Sue said this this morning, is that she said she ate a lot of peanut butter so her grandkids could play sports. Yes, we hear a lot, and grandparents are probably more common than others, that they're not appreciated for the ways that they're already supporting their kids' education. And we call that informal leadership. That just means that they are showing up for their kids. They're just not in the PTA, bake sale, parent-teacher conferences, literacy night ways. And if we had more time and we're in person, we'd all talk about how did our families show up in our own education and support us succeeding in school. Usually it wasn't PTAs and bake sales. It was things like setting high expectations at home, making sure that you were civically engaged, that you were volunteering in the church, that you had community service on your resume. Now it looks like social media, like asking for information on social media from other parents or sharing resources via social media, or quietly advocating for their child. They're trying to get information here and there. So when we engage families for the first time, always come into it from this assumption that they're already doing something. You just don't see it yet. So start with questions of, please, we're here today because we need to talk about why absenteeism continues to go up. And as a school, we just need your all's help. Can you please tell us how you're already ensuring that your kid comes to school as much as they can? We'd love to hear some examples from around the room. That positions families as we we're assuming you're already doing your best and you're doing great things. We just need to hear about that so that we can learn how to partner from the school. So relationship first, clear purpose for engagement, be transparent with constraints, early involvement before decisions are made. That's kind of obvious. Mutual accountability. So we often shy away from asking families to do too much because we're like, oh, we're just so grateful you showed up in the first place. But a better approach is to show that you do respect their partnership by asking them and telling them the expectations you have for them to advocate for their child. So we do expect that if the newsletters are too long, or if you're getting the newsletters too often, or you don't like the format in which you're getting information, it's on you all to tell us that. So we assume if the click rates are going up and no one's saying anything, that you all like the newsletters. And if you do not, you need to tell us that. Things like that, where it tells them that this is a partnership, which means it can't just be the school just throwing stuff out all the time and hoping it's landing well. So let families know we have expectations of you too, so that we know if this is working. That can also look like parent leadership roles, parents showing up in person, but sometimes that can just look like we expect feedback. And then testing new ideas for the purpose of relationship building. This is one of my favorites because I've seen some really wild ideas work. One of my favorite ones last year was an inflatable race. It was an idea from a parent. She thought it would be fun and different and create a little community buzz. And of course, the family advocacy group was like, okay. And it did, and people loved it. And they still consistently, 2 years later, have about 80 folks that show up consistently for their family and community engagement events because they do these sometimes silly ideas for the purpose of relationship building in order to get some engagement momentum going. So that can be like, well, I thought we weren't supposed to do it for entertaining, and an inflatable race feels like entertaining. So we do have to be careful that we're not always doing these ideas for relationship building and there's not something else coming. So the way they couple it is they had students present artwork, they had performances, they had students showcasing some of their projects they were doing, but they did a little hook on the front end of having these inflatable races that brought a little bit of media attention. And then it was like, what are you guys doing here? Oh, well, we're the family and community group, and we're here to talk about how we can all support student outcomes. So there's a balance. I feel like I did this. Just the last line there. This is how families become your strongest ambassadors. And we've seen that happen. Some of our families, English language learner families, they had a great example of this in saying that they couldn't volunteer in the school because they didn't have background checks. And so the principal brought it to the principal's attention, and they said, well, that's not our policy, that's the state policy. And so then the families went on to invite the state commissioner to one of their meetings and first showed all of the great things that they were doing for their community, and then presented, and this is a barrier for us. And the state commissioner said, well, that's not a state policy, that's your district policy. And only to discover in that meeting that it was a myth of a policy. And they were able to clarify what was needed for background checks wasn't as intense as the school thought. And so those families realized that they could be part of the solution, and they have gone off to start their own nonprofit in Northern Kentucky, and they're doing all kinds of crazy cool stuff now. But it's because the school said, I mean, here's where the policy states it. Like, I don't know what we can do about that. And they just kept taking it up the ladder. So they start to be some of your strongest ambassadors. And then voice matters when there's real decisions on the table. So kind of back to we're not just engaging families for the sake of engagement. We need them at the table because we've got real decisions, we have real issues, we have things that we know they deeply care about, and we can all problem solve and work together in partnership. So if you don't have a real decision or a real problem to talk about, then you might want to rethink why you're gathering the families in the first place. The way we think about building conditions within a school is using these 5 objectives, and these are the family-friendly school objectives. They could also just be taken as they are and used in your own context. So you don't have to be in the family-friendly schools network to take these objectives and think about them in your own context. So this is how you think about, do we have the conditions in place? So the 4 C's are really good for one-time events and strategies. This is more about setting the conditions in the school so that authentic partnerships can thrive. First is, are you building trusting relationships? A system for that would be every family gets a welcoming phone call within the first month of every school year, or maybe when you come back from Christmas break. And anybody can make that phone call. Cafeteria, bus drivers, secretary, homeroom teachers. Every school gets a welcoming phone call within the first month. Home visits, the more we see research about home visits, the more they are just the gold star of building relationships, but not always feasible. Laundry days is an example of something our Frisks do here, and that's an opportunity to meet a basic need and help families build community. So it's just bringing a washer and dryer into the school and giving families a kind of private access to that. You, of course, like with a staff person at the door, and you have 9 to noon or certain hours set once or twice a week, and families are able to come in and do their laundry for free. You know, you provide the detergent and all of that with local donations, and then it's just community building. Two-way communication, grandparent groups are great, well attended for us here, parent cafes and grandparent groups. Anything that gets that back and forth going between grandparent to grandparent or grandparents to school staff. Shared responsibility. I love the learning walks for this audience because learning walks are about families silently walking around and observing class in action. And school is a whole lot different now than it used to be. And so families can come in and just walk through classrooms and spend about 30 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes in each room, and just kind of get a day in the life feel for what it feels like to go to school in 2026. So those have been really successful. And then advocacy, how the system works. We found that whiteboards and just writing out the organizational structure of how schools work is really helpful, especially for families of different backgrounds and cultures. So just that, like, there's a Department of Education, then there's regents, then there's districts, then there's principals and school counselors. And that helps them see it's not just the principal doesn't like me, or the teachers don't care about my kid. They start to see it's just like every other corporation, like we're a system inside a system inside a system. And that can help create some more of those partnership conversations. So just 20-minute Q&A, how the school system works. You know, don't make it complicated. Whiteboard, let people ask questions. And then community partnerships, where do families already live, work, and play? So if you live in one of those types of communities where you do have a cluster of families that all work at a certain factory or live in a certain apartment complex, that makes this one really nice. Take information to them, take relationship building to their home turf. So this one is about finding out where they are and going there versus always asking folks to come out of their comfort zone onto our home turf. So recap, the 4 C's, man, we did a lot of good stuff, guys, in 20 minutes. So 4 C's, that's a nice tool in your toolbox for checking single strategies and events to be high impact. Always ask, what problem are we trying to solve and who is closest to it before just, we need students engaged. We need grandparents engaged. Start with the problem or the task that you're trying to accomplish, and then who do you need to engage? Remember the easy pitfalls. Transparency is everything. Honor and respect. There's already informal leadership happening. We just need to ask those questions, and always coming from that relationship first mentality. And we must have systems for relationship building. We have systems for information giving. We have systems for parent-teacher conferences. We have systems for everything, but we don't always think about systems for relationship building. So what is our system at this school to ensure every parent and every family and student is known? And if you want to be part of family-friendly schools, you can use that QR code, or Tori just dropped the link in the chat box, and you can hear about the National Family Friendly Schools work. It encompasses all of these best practices, but and the objectives that I went over. So what we learned: family engagement fails when voice has no influence. They're already leading in meaningful ways. Ask. Transparency builds trust. Systems must be ready. It's not really about an overhaul. I hope you felt that today. It's not about, oh, we're doing everything wrong. It's about being intentional with how you're structuring your asks and your conversations. And use the 4 C's, name the problem, and the family-friendly school objectives. And this is the research that guides our work. If you don't know some of these, I highly recommend looking into them, and you'll have copies of the slides. That be it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brooke. I think this was so helpful to hear, and just you brought up so many things that we can apply right now and think about in our day-to-day work, but also think about as we map things forward. So I think we have time for a question, if you're up for that, at least a question or maybe 2. Okay, and I see one that came through that says, it was helpful to hear the recommendation that if we push information out, there also needs to be a call to action. Could you provide some additional examples of effective call to actions that feel really doable for families? Oh, and I think you're muted. It's okay.
Yeah, that's a really good one. And keep it short and sweet with those calls to action. So if you want to think about, we need families to do these 4 things this month, sometimes breaking that into 4 short information pieces that go out. Sometimes we're like, okay, well, throw that in the newsletter, throw that in the newsletter, throw that in the newsletter. And it ends up being this huge thing with like 5 calls to action. So there is like the other extreme where it's so daunting that folks avoid it. So simple calls to action can be things like, tell us if you're coming to the event, yes, no, here. Just like little things that where you're like pushing a button, like something that requires my engagement so that I know you're going to have asked me to do something. I have seen where it's like, ask your kid this question at dinner tonight. I have mixed feelings about that. I feel like it was really cool. Like when it first came on the scene, I think that that was new and everybody loved it. I do feel like by the time I get to the bottom of the newsletter, I've got like 40 questions I'm supposed to ask my kid at dinner that night. So be careful with some of those, but just quick actions that you're asking them to do, but not like labor intensive, always bringing a donation or write a story about this, but click yes, no here. Polls, for example, like a quick poll.
That's a great idea. So those quick bite-sized actions and asks of them. And I agree with you on the newsletter. Isn't it so tempting just to put everything in a newsletter?
Yeah.
And then
We do it too. I mean, we do it organizationally. Yes.
Absolutely. Yes. So, okay. So think about those bite-sized actionable things where they're not the heavy lifts or the big asks. Great, thanks. And I see one more, and I think we could quickly do this. Laura asked in the chat, the 4 C's are fantastic once you get people there. If you struggle with folks attending, how do you recommend communicating that you've overhauled the event or what they can expect that's positive?
That's so good. So what we say is to start small when you think about overhauling a certain event. So if it's a literacy night, for example, find 3 to 5 families that you feel like could benefit from the literacy. Not these are the 5 families that always come to everything, but kind of those middle of the road. We feel like this could be really helpful. Get those 3 to 5 families finding it very helpful, and because you're doing the 4 C's, and those families invite more families, or those families have quotes of, this has helped my kids so much, I'm so glad I've attended this. So we find like if you start with like a small number and ensure that it's really high quality, then it grows naturally than trying to be like all things to all people. And then it just ends up this like watered down, like usher them in the front door, out the back door event. So even if it's 15 families are showing up regularly, but those are the 15 families that you want there, then that's high impact. You don't need all the families in the school to attend all the things.
Absolutely. That's such good advice. And sometimes it is quality over quantity. And that
Well,
feels
in our state metrics, that's hard too. Most state metrics are looking for the quantity number. They want to know how many. And so I think that naturally positions us to try to crank up our how many, and even grant applications and everything. They want to know how many. And if we can get more, and the outcome metrics are so hard. It's like, well, I can't tell you how many, but I can tell you that 90% of these kids' reading proficiency increased. It's like, well, I don't have that data yet. We've met 3 times. So you're really stuck with this. I don't have a quality metric if I'm not increasing participation month over month. So I do think that that's our urge to get big too fast, is to prove it's good. We have more participants this month than last month.
Absolutely. Great. Thanks so much, Brooke. This was wonderful. This was a breath of fresh air because we can really walk away knowing some things that we can do. So thank you for your time and your wisdom and your perspective. We really appreciate it.
It was an honor. Thank you all.
Thanks. Okay, so to close out day one, I am really looking forward to facilitating a discussion about how family engagement is taking shape as a priority across Appalachia. And as we move into this conversation, I encourage you to turn to page 6 of the Summit Action Planning Workbook. And we hope you'll use this space to reflect on your current approaches to family engagement, identify pressing needs, and jot down any key insights or takeaways or things that you want to do as a result of today's conversation. And I am excited and honored to introduce our panelists of state leaders from across the Appalachian region who are helping to really move this work forward in meaningful ways. First, we have Marcia Van Hook, who has over 35 years of experience as an educational leader in school improvement, large-scale system transformation, and family engagement. Having served as a principal, district leadership coach, and now at the Kentucky Department of Education, Marcia collaborates with parents and organizations and partners across the state to improve family engagement efforts. She currently serves as chair of the Family Partnership Council and the Youth and Family Engagement Committee. Next, we have Taylor Rayfield, who is the Senior Project Manager for the Division of Coordinated School Health. He oversees daily operations, streamlining strategic initiatives, and advising the Assistant Commissioner. Previously, Taylor served as Senior Manager of Family Support and Engagement and State Coordinator of Family Resource Centers. Next up, we have Melissa Duvall. She's the Director of Parent Engagement at the Virginia Department of Education, a 2-time graduate of Virginia Commonwealth University, and a proud parent of 2 children. Over the course of 17 years, Melissa served as a visual arts teacher and middle school principal in Chesterfield County and Richmond Public Schools, respectively. As an educational leader, Melissa co-created opportunities for student success alongside teachers, families, and community partners. She is most proud of her commitment to the power of the arts in her work that promotes students and educators to be their authentic selves, which in turn leads them to create a powerful community of belonging. And then last, but certainly not least, is Emily Pearson, a coordinator at the West Virginia Department of Education, where she leads the launch and implementation of the Engaging Families West Virginia initiative. Emily's work focuses on supporting families and creating early intentional learning moments with children before they enter school, recognizing these experiences as critical to long-term student success and to strong family-school partnerships across the state of West Virginia. So there is so much wisdom on this panel, and I feel like I've said that a lot today because it's just been a great day of wisdom, but I'm really excited to dive in with this group and to talk about what's going on in the field of family engagement throughout our states. So thank you all for joining us. So to get us started, we'd like to ask you all to help us understand your state agency's perspective on family engagement right now. So how is your state approaching family engagement? And Marcia, I think we'll start with you for this question, if that's okay.
That's fine. Thank you so much for having me today. And so I'm very excited to be here, and what a great, exciting panel to learn from and to speak with. So in Kentucky, and I know Kentucky's been referenced a little bit throughout the day already, but in Kentucky, we are really trying to make our parent family, including grandfamilies and those that are helping support our children, more, those resources being more front and center. And so we have an ever-growing list of supports and guidance and resources and connections, both interagency and outside of our main agency, and just really trying to make that much more visible. In November, I was super excited that we actually launched our Parent and Family Connection Hub, and it's really easy to access from the main Kentucky Department of Education page. So parents don't have to dig, or grandparents don't have to dig very far in that vast system of offices and things that are there. So front and center, and it really walks them through how to get involved, how to support their child academically, those students with diverse needs, and just whole child and wellness support. The other thing that we did, to really push that out, was to use social media as a tool for us to share, because we know a lot of folks are on social media. And so during our governor designated a week in November to be Family Engagement Week in Education in Kentucky. I know that's a mouthful, but each day of that week, we pushed out a message on Facebook page from the KDE site, just showing families how to connect and how to get involved with a different focus for each day. We also have like a statewide campaign for chronic absenteeism that social media, there's commercials, there's messages on buses. And so we've tried to really meet the parent where they are and try to be more accessible.
That's great, Marcia. Thank you. And it sounds like, that focus on easy access and just ways that they can quickly get that information is a big part of the approach. Thank you for sharing. Taylor, let's turn to you next with that same question. Could you help us understand your state agency's perspective and how you're approaching family engagement right now?
Yes, thank you again for allowing Tennessee to be represented. I was sending messages to my colleagues as Marcia was talking. I was like, love the Parent Connection Hub. That's excellent. So thinking about family engagement in Tennessee, Tennessee is a little bit unique. Tennessee has coordinated school health in every public school district across the state. And so Tennessee Coordinated School Health connects health and well-being with academics by uniting families, educators, and communities to really ensure that every student is equipped to succeed in the classroom and beyond. Again, Tennessee leads this model because we are the only state in the nation to have a coordinated school health model in every public school district, as I mentioned. And so this is done with coordinated school health. There's 8 components of coordinated school health, with student, family, and community involvement being one of those. Our department's Division of Coordinated School Health really supports the integration of each of the 8 components through guidance, training, and monitoring. One thing in particular related to family engagement, in 2024, the department worked alongside our State Board of Education to update its parent family involvement and engagement policy, which highlighted parents and families being the child's first and most important teacher, as well as really defining the statutorily requirements of what the department will do, one of those being really working alongside districts and providing them critical professional learning and support so they can implement strong family engagement practices. But also, one of the pieces related to the policy is that there is a distinction between what parent involvement looks like, parent and family involvement looks like, versus engagement. So defining the distinction between involvement and engagement is really big. The other thing that we have really been doing to support that work, my colleague is listening, watching this, Sharice McDaniel, she's our family support and engagement manager, and she's developed an entire cohort related to family engagement and provided some professional learning on this to walk alongside districts, whether it be teachers, administrators, and looking at it from what our state board policy says related to the outline pieces of the components and how we can walk alongside districts to implement high quality engagement and involvement practices. And that be whether it's for the parent, guardian, grandparent. We want to make sure that all parents are fully engaged and involved.
Thanks so much, Taylor. And I think that's so important, that discussion, especially around involvement versus engagement, and how engagement can really be that deep dive. And so impressive that you have that across the entire state, what you were talking about at first. So thanks so much for sharing. And I think we'll shift now, Melissa, if you'd like to answer that same question, and give us a feel for what's happening in Virginia.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here and to hear from my colleagues who are doing wonderful work across the country at the national level and at each of these states in the Appalachia region. My office began in 2023, and we launched with a very clear mission, which was to have a seat at the table for parents truly as partners. And so we started off with one of the easiest, low-hanging fruits in our reach, which is our state website. The website was primarily geared prior to 2023 to help school divisions and educators, which is great, but it was really missing the language necessary to speak to parents, to caregivers, to grandparents, to kinship, in the sense that we were talking about their child, not with their child, or in partnership about what could be done next. So for example, one of the first things that we did beyond our website was we created the first ever state standardized test parent reports. Sitting in this conversation, I am humbly reminded of my core in education, which is, everyone has an equal seat at the table. And so the idea of how we use language to describe our partnerships is really important. So I would love in hopefully the near future to rename parents as families at the very least, and then to go deeper with individualized resources for different types of care. So the test reports, I think, are one of the areas that we're exploring. What else can we do in response to the needs of our families? Because as we know in education, we know what that test means. We know how important it is, but then what do families do with this number? We know that the stress our educators face with that test number, with that test score, what does it mean in the bigger picture? So we really wanted to pull it way back and give our families an opportunity to see what does that mean. So we got really honest with our families, and we talked about the gap that exists in terms of students' proficiency, what it means for state funding, what it means to an educator's day in life as a teacher with lesson plans. And we started to really sort of digest these things together. And if you don't know, our state is undergoing some changes around our accountability models and accreditation. So this work is very, very relevant. And we also don't want to lose the heart of the matter, which is our kids, in all of these decisions that are being made above their head, especially with our families sort of, being pushed to the side a little bit, not experts in any of these conversations. So part of what my office is trying to do is to bring them back to the table, because some of those conversations are hard enough as it is for stakeholders at the division level and in leadership at the state level. So keeping our eye on parents is my sole humble opportunity, along with my small office. So that's a little bit of what we've been doing lately since 2023. But what we also hope to do is we also hope to break down this barrier that exists due to our state constitution. And I heard someone earlier talking about advocacy and empowering our families to understand why certain things happen and why they don't. And one of the things that we face in our Commonwealth is communication. So states have what's called or school divisions have what's called local control. And that says that the divisions can take what the state produces, so what my office produces, what my assessment team produces, and they can share it, or they don't have to. They can use what they want to communicate with their families. And so that creates for us a little bit of a gap of the reality of what our families are receiving and what they understand. So I'll conclude with this. We have a lot of potential in Virginia to really, really save that seat at the table in perpetuity for all caregivers. And I am really excited to learn from this panel and from everyone at the summit. So thank you again for the opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. And I love that, really inviting caregivers and students where applicable to have a seat at the table and a voice in the conversations that are happening. Just everything you shared was great. Now, Emily, I'll turn it over to you to share a little bit about what's happening in West Virginia.
Sure. Thank you for having me as well. I'm happy to be here. I oversee our new Engaging Families West Virginia initiative, which just launched back in July. But West Virginia is intentionally shifting from, I think, the high quantity family engagement to the high quality. We're trying to focus on the quality of family engagement that we're incorporating. And, our focus is really to rebuild the trust and in our families. We are a tight-knit state. We protect our own, and we want that trust to be built in our families, especially with families who may have had barriers or negative experiences in school when they were in school. So we're really trying to ask schools to control what they can control. Two-way communication, flexible options, kind of how Marcia was saying, those respecting routines and making it easy access. And we just want that level of engagement. So we're encouraging schools to maybe tier their family engagement, just kind of like instruction, prioritizing the deeper partnership and where they're most needed. And so that's when we kind of thought of this Engaging Families West Virginia initiative, and it basically just started, and it is a Facebook page. And that's all it is right now, because we just wanted it to be the easiest way that we could reach our families, the easiest way that we can have any type of caregiver be able to see what we're putting out there and what we're encouraging families to do. Because, I think everybody has social media. Everybody has some type of social media platform, and Facebook is probably the most widely used one right now between lots of generations. And so that was our main goal right there, is to lock down which platform we would use, and Facebook was kind of a no-brainer. Whether we stretch into different platforms is still a discussion, but right now we're just on Facebook, and we are just a page where we are sharing simple, no-cost activities that you can be doing at home with your little ones. And that's kind of where our target is right now too with our family engagement push, is we're trying to target families with young children before they even enter school. Not saying that we're not sharing anything for older children as well, but we're trying to target families with young children to, reinforce that partnership before they even enter school. And again, we're really highlighting no cost. We don't want any family to ever feel like they have to have these fancy materials at home, or they have to go buy anything, or they have to, even if it is something that's $1 at the store, we don't want anyone to feel like they have to have any type of material. We're showing them things that they can be doing at home. Pull the pots and pans out, counting while you're doing laundry, incorporating their kids into everyday tasks and building those engaging opportunities, conversations, intentional learning moments that you're already doing, just including your kids with them. And so that's what we're trying to show. We're trying to keep it very short and very, we know how quickly people are scrolling on Facebook, whether it's at night or whether they're watching a show. Maybe they're not even really paying attention, but if they're scrolling and we can catch them for at least 20 to 30 seconds, and they can read our post or watch a video that we're sharing, then we've done our job. We want something to just grasp them really quickly, and just trying and reach as many families as we can across the state, as well as we are trying to share what else is going on across our state. We're just one group that's running this Facebook page, but if we follow a lot of our libraries and schools across our state, so that we can share what's going on, so that people who may follow our page know what's going on in their area as well. So that's how we're trying to approach it here in West Virginia.
I think that sounds great. And I think that's so important, that easy to access, no cost information. Like you said, in 20 seconds, that can plant the seed for thinking about family engagement and building trust and the other things you mentioned. So thank you all so much. I think that helps set a foundation for our conversation today, to just have a feel for the great things that are happening across our region. This next question is to build on what Ana shared earlier about the increase that we're seeing in numbers of students living with grandparents and kinship caregivers. So I'm curious to know what that specifically looks like in your state. Are you seeing an increase of students living with grandparents and kinship caregivers? And Marcia, I think we'll start with you again, if that's okay.
That's fine. I'll unmute, and thank you. And yes, that caught my ear when Ana spoke of that too, because we're seeing the same thing in Kentucky. Even just since COVID, we are having a 1 to 2% increase per year of our students that are homeless. And so when we think about students who are not living with parents, they are living with a caregiver, they are living with a grandfamily, they are living with someone in that extended family. 78% of our homeless students are classified as doubled up. They're not living with the parent, they're living with a grandparent and not someone. So we have approximately 16,500 to 17,000 students that are homeless in the state. And so that becomes really important, as Ana kind of alluded to this morning, for FAFSA. So when the parent is not there in that situation and that child is living, student, I should say, is living in a shelter, they're unsheltered or they're doubled up, they are classified as unaccompanied homeless. And that classification is so important to opening doors for them when it comes time for FAFSA. They may think, I can't go to college, I don't have that support, but they do have the support of being able to have access to other funds just through that classification. And so it really does make their eligibility post-secondary much wider than before. And so we really do focus on really helping grandparents. There's lots of schools and districts across our state that have grandfamily support groups. I know Grandparent Day in elementary schools is huge in Kentucky, as I'm sure everyone, I see Emily nodding, just to celebrate that. And so there's, again, trying to make information easy and free. I loved what Emily said, you don't need the money. Some grandfamilies don't know the questions to ask. They don't know how, but how do we just support those students that are there in school with just being that unaccompanied homeless classification as they look further into their studies?
Absolutely. And that's such an important point for all of us in different states to be thinking about and to looking at. Next, Taylor, can you share, are you seeing an increase in students being raised by grandfamilies and kinship caregivers?
So in Tennessee, our last State of the Child report that was released by the Tennessee Commission on Youth reported that 1 in 10 Tennessee children, of course, are living with their grandparents. And so one of the things that I'll say, just kind of piggybacking off of what Marcia was alluding to as well, and something that Emily mentioned, I think that that's so incredibly important for states when we think about how are we supporting school districts. This is one of the things that myself and my colleague always are talking to districts about, is that communication piece. Certainly we want two-way communication, but are we oftentimes assuming what the best practice communication is in terms of, well, if it's a grandparent, maybe they don't like that text-based platform. They might appreciate a phone call, or they might only do email, or they might physically need a home visit, if you will. And so when we think about that two-way communication as well, and looking at the data, if there's continual increases across the state, how are we ensuring that we're meeting the needs of every family based upon those communication practices?
It's so important, and it does. I mean, everything that we do in terms of communication, we need to be thinking of from this perspective as well. Thank you. Melissa, how about in Virginia? Are you seeing an increase of students being raised by grandfamilies and kinship caregivers?
Yeah, we really are. So as I said before, my office has been officially in existence since August of 2023. And each year we've seen a 2% increase of the representation of families that reach out to us that are represented by a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, another caregiver that is operating in an official capacity. And I will say that is only as they report themselves. And so I saw this in a quote in one of the previous presentations, that's a challenge for our school divisions as well as it is for us at the state level. I think we've become comfortable with this idea of just, quickly receiving the yes or no, are you a parent? Yes or no, and then moving on instead of asking a little bit more of a deeper question. But of course, that questioning it requires trust. Like, why are you asking me that question? Why do you want to know if I'm their parent or not? And so that, as we've seen at our state, position, does create this vacuum of support, because the families that reach out to us are reaching out because they have hit the end of the road. They have exhausted their resources. They, in some cases, as we've heard today, they don't know which avenues they could have turned down because they don't think that their guardianship is official enough to require care, or that they won't be taken seriously. So with that being said, I think our office has developed a reputation of trustworthiness, which is a little odd sometimes to say at the state level, because we're often seen as like the oversight. But again, we're in a position to change that messaging, to change that game, all in support of children. And so over the last 2 school years, we've seen a 2% increase each year. So what that looks like is 1 out of every 10 calls or emails is from someone who is not the biological parent of a child in school. And what we're receiving too from our partner organizations is that that ratio is actually closer to 30%, 3 out of every 10. And that is mostly taking place in our regions that are rural and urban.
Wow. Those numbers really make you think, and that 2% increase year over year really adds up and makes a difference. So that's really interesting perspective. And I think you also touched on something else that's so important in that gray space of these placements. And so building that trust first, as you mentioned, so you can have the conversations to have a better understanding of what this looks like is so critical. Thanks for sharing. Emily, how about in West Virginia? Are you seeing a similar kind of increase?
Yeah, so just like Melissa was saying, we definitely have and have kind of always had an increase in grandparents taking care of their grandchildren. And like I mentioned, earlier, I think our West Virginia motto we're kind of known, we take care of our own. And whether that's a positive or a negative, that's where grandparents step in and they take care of their own. Most of the time it's unexpectedly. It's not really ever planned. I don't think grandparents ever really plan to take care of their grandchildren, but it's again in an unexpected circumstance, and they're navigating a lot. It's sudden. It may be an overnight type of thing that may happen, and there may be some trauma, or there may be having to now navigate special education systems, mental health needs, and so then they're having to step back in a parent role where maybe they were far removed from that for a long period of time, and so there's lots of moving parts that I think are hitting them all at once. And so again, I go back to, we are really trying to build that trust in them, that the school and educators and the system is here for them, to support them, and to help them and focus on what we can control, which is, that consistent judgment-free communication, simplified access to services, and, predictable support routines. We want them to know that if you're if you're on Facebook and you're following our page, you can simply send a message if that's your easiest way of communication. Kind of going back to what Taylor said, maybe they don't even know how to send an email. And here we are saying, well, we emailed you this and we emailed you that. Well, maybe they're not getting it. Maybe they're not receiving it. Maybe that phone call is the easiest way to connect with them. And so we really have to meet them where they're at, and, making sure that, when the trust goes up, then the collaboration will follow. And so, that's kind of where we're at with our grandfamilies.
Emily and Marcia, if you can share more about Grandparents' Day in elementary schools and what that looks like. I know you hit on that a little bit early, and we'd love to hear more.
You can go ahead, Marcia, if you want. I just simply agreed whenever Marcia brought that up. I just know it's always been a huge day or a huge week in our school system, in the county that I live in. And I have a 5-year-old son now who's just entered school, and Grandparents' Day is like always on the calendar, I feel. And when I previously used to be a pre-K teacher, and it was always something we did, it was just a no-brainer. We had a grandparents' lunch or a breakfast, or grandparents come in and do a craft, or grandparents come in that week to read a story. It's just a big it's a big thing in West Virginia. And I know that's not just the county that I live in, it's statewide. It's just we really highlight and want to highlight those relationships with grandparents, and whether that's both grandparents or one, or and it's normally throughout a week. They typically allow grandparents to come in throughout the week and then kind of highlight something at the end of the week. So that's kind of what I've seen here in West Virginia, how we celebrate grandfamilies.
And I'll just expand upon what Emily's just said, and she's talked about that tight knit community like our states have. Like families are so vital and important, and so Grandparent Day is a huge deal. And I have seen, much to what Emily said, like they plan a lunch and the grandparents come in and they visit the classroom, and the kids read to the grandparents, and the grandparents read to the kids, and they do a craft, and they have something together. And it really is to celebrate and honor the grandparent. And one of the unexpected sides of that is sometimes that grandparent is the closest to that child, and they may have lost one of those grandparents. And here we have this time to celebrate with the one that is there and that is left. And so it can be whatever the school or the district as large. It can be a week. I've seen it very scaled, not so many. And then I've seen it where every child in that school has brought two grandparents, or an aunt and an uncle. And so it really is to celebrate the connection they have so that they do feel engaged and connected with the school.
Thanks so much for sharing more about the grandparent events you have. I know my children have their own Grandparents' Day starting next week. So, and I know Kayla just rejoined us, but I can go ahead and ask the next question while we all get back settled in. So what do you hear from your educators about the most pressing needs related to supporting students living with grandfamilies and kinship caregivers? And Taylor, if you want to start us off, you can go ahead.
Sure. So in Tennessee, obviously, we really try to dig in deep to the data and make our decisions being data driven. And so each year we partner alongside an entity that provides an educator survey. And so our most recent educator survey noted that family engagement was identified as one of the top 3 most urgent needs out of the coordinated school health realm. And then we also saw that with that, also 70% of the educators noted that they would like to see additional training on how to really build partnerships with parents to increase their students' overall well-being. And then above that, thinking about the mental health specific needs, 73% of educators who completed that survey really noted that family challenges, whether it be a financial burden or other barriers, that was a contributing factor that really negatively impacted students' mental health. And so those are really the 3 primary drivers of data that we were looking at specifically to family engagement and how we're going to proceed moving forward and what we've done in the past couple of years to support that work.
Thanks for sharing, Taylor. And Emily, maybe we'll pass this question to you next to answer.
I feel like I'm a broken record when I say this, but I think it's the communication aspect and how they can communicate with the families. I think a lot of educators, depending on their age and then the age of the grandfamily that is raising the children, communicating with them is sometimes such a big barrier. Again, whether it's they're trying to send emails, text messages, sometimes teachers use different apps and messaging systems to message families that way so that they don't, cross and have to give out phone numbers and stuff like that. And that can just sometimes be a barrier on how they can communicate with the family effectively. And again, whether it is a younger grandparent or an older grandparent, I know whenever I taught pre-K, I actually had in a class size of 20, I had 6 kids that were being raised by grandparents, one of which was being raised by a great grandparent. And so we used an app. Almost everybody was able to get the app, download it, use it, and maneuver it great. But she didn't use anything. She did not want to get on the phone or on her phone and use an app to message for any type of way. She just said, if anything happens, pick up the phone and call me. And so that was just, something kind of new for me as a younger teacher, where I have an app and I'm like, I'm going to get on here and just message these families and let them all know what's going on. I had to always remember, she's not going to see that. She's not going to get that update. She's not going to get it immediately in her pocket. I'm going to have to give her a call at the end of the day to, run down what I sent out to the other families. And that's fine. But again, that's just something we have to kind of take into consideration. And what we're hearing statewide from from our educators in the classroom that are saying, you know, sometimes we just have these families that we can't even really get a hold of. And so we have to have different means of communication in order to get messages out to them and to be able to communicate with them.
That's so important. Thanks, Emily. And just a good reminder for all of us to just pause and really think about how we're communicating and what works for everyone, because not everyone has that same level of access or has the phone in their hand to see everything that's coming out. So thank you.
And I just want to say, I think our educators too, I mean, they go above and beyond, I think in all states, you know, whenever we need that extra, you know, I got to sit down at the end of the day and call this parent, this grandparent, you know, just to make sure we're getting the messages across. You know, it's never just, well, they didn't get it. You know, our educators are amazing and they go above and beyond for their families, probably even into their evenings, you know, in order to make sure that they're communicating with families the right way. So
making sure that they're getting all of that information. Yeah, such an important thing to point out. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Melissa, we'll ask you this question next. What are you hearing from educators in your state about the most pressing needs related to supporting students living with grandfamilies and kinship caregivers?
I promise I don't think that all of them are talking together and like exchanging notes, but it is the exact same thing that my colleagues have said. It's technology and communication gaps. So I won't repeat what they're facing. It's identical to what we're hearing in Virginia. But what I'll add, though, is another concern that we receive is navigating the seemingly ongoing custody changes. So how families are in the system, right? In the judicial system, looking at the transfer of guardianship, court appearances, documentation, how often that documentation needs to be updated and changed, what questions are allowed to be asked about that, who's invited to the IEP team, who's allowed to be there. This person was there last month and not there this month because of a change. And so it has educators sort of like dancing on the peripheral and not necessarily doing what they are trusted to do, which is to educate that child and communicate what's happening to that child to their caregiver. And so I say that like very firmly because that's what we're supposed to expect from them, right? We don't want them second guessing if they're allowed to communicate with the last person that they spoke to. We want to empower them to say, this is the person that was entrusted to care for this child. This is who we have on record. It's still okay. What you're hearing in the community or what the child is bringing to you is also relevant, that there could be an upcoming court case, that there could be an upcoming change for them. And sometimes it's sudden. Sometimes it's over the course of a holiday or a snow day, week, that creates that change. And then we come back to school and that child is missing. That child is no longer there. And then we're introduced to a new caregiver. So this unease that educators feel about the continuity of care and the continuity of communication really, really weighs on them. I do think, I am partnered with an educator. He's a teacher in a local nearby division. And I hear it from him every night that he's worried about X, Y, and Z. He's worried about this kiddo. And the way we're seeing some things happen in some communities with the involvement of a government agency, changing a family dynamic overnight is something that he's facing. And so we're seeing the dynamics of a family change unexpectedly, and sometimes we see it coming. We see an illness, we see a court issue. We see a family who just doesn't have the means and then guardianship has to change. But then we see these sudden cases that are disarming to the entire community. So we are not sure. We don't have the answers to all of this. We don't have, the one solution, the one social media post, the one, parent caregiver handout to solve it all. But what we can do, I think, is to stand alongside our educators and say, communication when it comes to us will be shared openly, will be shared quickly, and it won't be at the expense of like your good night's sleep, because you deserve to know who you're talking to, and that family in turn needs to know that they're able to reach out to you no matter the circumstance.
Yeah, that's so important. And I think you bring up a good point that these transitions are so hard for the families, but they're also really hard for the schools and for the educators to know how to navigate and adjust and appropriately support too. So the more we can communicate, and like you said, setting that expectation of what they can expect for communication is so helpful too. So Marcia, how about you? What are you seeing in Kentucky? What are you hearing from your educators?
Oh, and I made some notes while Melissa and Emily both were talking, because Emily hit upon a key thing about trust. And Melissa was talking about that vacuum that sometimes exists. And I feel we are so fortunate in Kentucky to have the FRISC, which is our family resource, our family youth and resource centers. And so the schools have that person there at the school, and they help with basic needs. They help with food. They help with clothing. And a lot of times that is the person that's helping to fill that vacuum and to build that trust with the teachers and the principal in the building. They are the ones that know a lot of times a change of custody. Who do you get a hold of in the family that actually will speak with you? It may not be the grandmother that they're living with. You might need to get that message by contacting the great aunt, because that's the person who is there. And so they become not only that trusting partner, but they are vital to have on the leadership team there in that school. They need a seat at that table. They have information that the teacher and the principal doesn't have or cannot get, and they lend a voice and a color to those conversations when you're planning events. They also will tell you like what's the best way, or how do we engage? And I know we've talked about engagement in 1,000 ways today, but how do we engage when this is the need in our community, or this is the need with this particular family? And that family may be, 12 cousins that are 12 students in your school, and they're living with 12 different people. And so how does that connection work? And so our FRISC are vital to helping us learn from what those needs are, and to connect and help fill those needs and get those voices to the educator, as well as the educator can share with that leadership group there with FRISC as well. It often fills in the puzzle.
Thank you so much, Marcia. I think that's helpful information for us to think about, and really finding the person at the school who can help connect the dots for the family, and stepping back and looking at that and thinking about basic needs. And to build on that, I'd like to hear from you all, just maybe like quick responses on this, thinking about cross-agency and community partnerships and how those are showing up in your states. We talked earlier with Ana about the systems to navigate and the paperwork. And I know Sue mentioned to all of us that she was eating peanut butter sandwiches to have the money for her students. And so when we think about navigating systems or connection to outside resources, how are you all partnering with other organizations and using community partnerships and resources that exist to help support educators in schools and the families that they're supporting? And I'm not sure, I don't know if one person might have an answer on that specifically they might want to share.
I'm happy to share for Tennessee. So
Okay.
as I mentioned at the beginning, there is a coordinated school health coordinator in every public school district across the state, and a part of that gamut and state board policy and law of what that states is that they would also have a district school health advisory council. And on that, the makeup is working alongside having community partners, parents, guardians. And so that's one of the key pieces. I failed to mention at the beginning also that we do have family resource centers in Tennessee. So that is an addition to that coordinated school health infrastructure. They're not in every school district, but they're in approximately 50%. And so that is also one of those navigational pieces. With coordinated school health being that coordinator, if you will, in each one of their districts, they're really the ones that are the boots on the ground in their school districts to help coordinate internal and external stakeholders, of which we talk about on a significant basis, and the navigational piece. I always tell folks when we are doing trainings or PD related to family engagement, in education we are very acronym heavy, but I'll always pose this question to audiences, and I'll say, well, raise your hand if you have a difficulty knowing who to go to in your own school district. And oftentimes we have lots of people raise their hands, and so I follow that up with saying, if you have a difficulty figuring out where to navigate for specific needs, imagine what our families are going through on how they navigate. And so how do we help support them in ensuring that they are able to navigate internally and externally those resources appropriately and efficiently?
Thanks so much, Taylor. Those resources can often become overwhelming too, and I think that's such an important point. We have a question for Melissa specifically. You talked about the challenges for teachers navigating custody changes, How might you coach a teacher on best handling that sort of a conversation that might be surprising for them or catch the educator off guard?
Let's see. Okay, let me see if I can understand this question. What advice would I give in a coaching conversation with the teacher navigating the?
Yes, it seems like if an educator is navigating
Yeah.
that custody change and trying to have a
Mhm.
conversation about it, how might you coach them to best handle that conversation?
Yeah, sure. So I would say, is your principal aware of your apprehension? And if it's not your principal, if you don't have a great close relationship with them, is it your department chair? I think every teacher needs to know that they're not alone in a building. I served as an administrator for 10 years in the public school system. And I would think that I was the person people could feel comfortable going to, but that's, relationships are unique, right? And so I think knowing that there's someone in the building that you could air the concern with would be number one. Don't try to take it home with you. Don't sit there and think that your concerns are invalid. They certainly are. Social workers have a very powerful role. I know that we are stretching them very, very thin. I know that not every school has a full-time social worker, or at least one that's assigned to them every single day in the building. But that is an excellent, excellent person on your staff that could also help you navigate that. But I would say to them, don't hold it. So I guess that's the first thing is don't hold it. Don't hold that apprehension. Don't think that your concern is invalid. Don't think that you're out of line for wondering. Ask someone you trust in the building. Number two is, what are you asking? Is it about communication rights? Is it about, is it okay to reach out to? Is it okay to wonder when is something going to happen to this kid? I've heard rumors. All of those things need to be addressed because you, as the adult in charge of that child, have an obligation to shut down that rumor mill or shut down those flarings of this implicit bias that we think every child who has guardianship outside of the norm is in conflict or has something wrong with them. That is something that we need to break down. So I would say the second point is air those things to that trusted person and pursue it down to the truth. Don't pursue it down to rumor. Don't pursue it down to this is what so-and-so told me 2 weeks ago. There has to be some sort of truth that we want to get to on behalf of that kiddo. And I would number three and finally say, what is the law? What is the law? So that is the part where school administration should absolutely be aware of your concern, because if it is a matter of giving student information to a caregiver and that caregiver relationship is changing, that caregiver may still be in the picture legally. So that is something that doesn't necessarily just need to be assumed that one person's communication, for example, their email or number is no longer the primary, doesn't mean that they're still not obligated to receive information about a kiddo. So I would just summarize this really quick. Coach a conversation. Number one, who's your trusted person? Find them. Make sure that they know their stuff. Two, ask all the questions. Don't take any rumor for truth. And number three, know the law. And if you don't know the law, consult someone who does.
That's great. What a great way to put that. And I like 3 easy steps that we can all think about and remember. So thank you so much. And I will say, and Laura shared this in the chat too, to expand on this legal conversation, we have Emily Peeler joining us tomorrow, and she'll be sharing a lot around this as well. So we can continue this part of the conversation tomorrow with Emily. So thank you all so much. Melissa, that was really helpful. And as we wrap up, this time always goes so quickly. So as we wrap up, I think we'd like everyone to answer this question. If you could give one clear recommendation to district or school leaders who want to strengthen their support for kinship caregivers and grandfamilies, what should they start doing or stop doing right away? And Emily, maybe we'll start with you for this one, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. I love this one. And even though I feel like sometimes I ramble on, and again, I feel like sometimes I've been saying the same thing, but I think starting back to doing and focusing on what you can control within, whether that's within your school, whether that's within your county and statewide, and stop trying to change the family, because they've already gone through so many changes already, whether that was an unexpected placement into a different home. It's not a one-size-fits-all experience, and you have to be flexible. Tier the supports that you're giving. Ask the caregivers how they want to engage, and what's realistic for them. If they are better with phone calls, give them the phone calls. If they are better with handwritten notes on a napkin that gets put in the kid's backpack, give them that. Meet them where they're at in order to be able to get the messages across so that they feel supported, so that then they want to take the advice that you're giving them and get and engage with their child in the ways that they know that they can. If they know they're supported at the school, within the county, in the situation that they're in, then they are so much more willing to listen and take on any advice that we're giving them. And when the schools accept families as they are and they design their system around their lives, then the trust just grows from there, and then the student outcome improves as well, because that's the thing I think we have to focus on too, is we want to be able to communicate and engage with the family, but we also have to make sure that we're communicate and engaging with the child, because that's going to happen in the home that we're trying to engage with the families in as well. It's an ever evolving resource there, and so I think you can't change the families, but we can change how the schools show up for the families. And so that's I think my one clear recommendation.
That's great, and that's a great way to put it. Thanks so much, Emily. Yeah. Marcia, we'll turn to you for this same question. If you could give that one clear recommendation to districts or schools who want to strengthen their support, what should they start doing or stop doing?
I'll just start with the stop. I think we just need to stop assuming we know what they need. We just really need to have their voice at the table. And so when you're having these conversations at the state level, the district level, the school level, who's missing from the table in that conversation? There is so much we can learn from those grandfamilies and the kinship. What needs are they facing? Like, what is their most pressing need? And then from this, we learn so much, their challenges and how we can meet them. But then come away with that with a few things, like what are the immediate steps we as educators can take for tomorrow, next week, and what are those long-term transformative practices that we can undertake together. And then lastly, you really have to be thoughtful about what does that conversation look like? Who's going to facilitate that? How is that information gathered? What are the next steps? So it's that call to action, not just having them there, but building that trust that, everyone today has spoken about, that yes, we're listening. Yes, we want to meet your needs, and how do we do this together? So just stop assuming.
Stop assuming. Yeah. And it can be that simple, right? Don't make those assumptions and take the time to listen and build that trust. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Taylor, how about you? If you have one clear recommendation to districts or school leaders who want to strengthen their supports, what should they start doing or stop doing right away?
So I think I would add on to what Marcia and Emily said about the stop assuming piece, but take it one step further and saying we need to make sure that we are grounding ourselves in some type of data and looking at the data and doing something with it, but also making sure that we have a mechanism in place that is consistently assessing as we're putting and implementing new strategies, if they're working or not working. If they're not working, we might need to pivot and do something different instead of just continuing that same practice. The other thing that I would say is, when we think about effective home-to-school partnerships, it's a responsibility for everybody. We want the best for every student. And so when we think about what that looks like, it is the entire school building. And so how are we working to build the capacity and support every role, whether it's the classroom educator, the assistant principal, school counselor, social worker, etc. And that looks different from every lens. And so we really need to dig deep and think about how can we support that from all roles and what their clear, tangible evidence and ways that they can support specifically. Because oftentimes that isn't necessarily a multi-pieces of a class that you would have in an EPP program. So those are probably the two biggest things that I would say are most important.
I think so important, ground yourself in that data. And then I love what you said, don't be afraid to make adjustments when you need to. If it's not working, look at the data and then see what might work better and make those adjustments and pivots. Thanks, Taylor. Then last but not least, Melissa, if you had one clear recommendation for what schools or districts could start or stop doing, what would that be?
I've thought about this because it's, our districts and school leaders and teachers are already asked to do so much, start and start initiative after initiative. But I think my wish would be that it comes from a place of humanity, and that is to start using inclusive language tomorrow. Really thinking about families in the plurality of who is in the life of a child, since it's not virtue signaling, right? If you really do understand who is in their household, who is in their life day to day, who they wish there was in their life, honestly, right? I think all of those things help us connect person to person, but then using that language in written form, the idea of like not just saying parents and caregivers, but really naming it. If you have a class newsletter, just name all the different wonderful people that make up your classroom family, because it sends that message to the kid, I see you. And it also helps to create this asset-based foundation of caregiving and education that we could just see so much more togetherness come from, because of this, we have this idea that, every story that comes to us with a student that's not coming from a biological mom or dad has to be in crisis, right? So that, I think I'm going to pivot to the stop. Because if we think about every family as an asset, not what do they have to do for us, but who are they and how does that influence and make up the, this life that we have in our classroom every day? How do we start to build this appreciation for the diversity of our community? And so I think what that helps to stop do, and if we need to be more explicit with the stop maintaining that bias, that implicit bias that every child in this caregiver conversation is at a detriment because of the change. Not all of these stories are meant to live in perpetuity and sadness forever and ever and ever. Some of them, this is a life-saving change. Some of them, this is a change that they have been waiting for. Some of them, it is just more. It's mom and dad and auntie. It's all of these things, right? And so it's not up to us to diminish that or to take that away. So I think the inclusive language does more than we think. Thinking about it from an asset perspective is free, but it does take stopping the implicit bias and thinking about all of these children in crisis all the time. We have our own dynamics. They're not the same as our children. And so when we start thinking about the dynamics that they do have instead of the ones that we wish that they had, I think some things will really start to change.
That's so powerful. Thank you so much, Melissa. And I think, if we could just capture everything that you all just shared, right? Start using inclusive language tomorrow. Stop maintaining that bias. Not every child is in crisis all the time. Every family is an asset. Again, grounding yourself in the data, making adjustments where we need to, stopping the assumptions that we all might have, getting the family's voice at the table, building that trust, not trying to change the family, and really working to understand them and meet them where they are. And you all shared so many other great things, even in just that last question. But I think, as I think about those things, that's really foundational for us as we move into our day tomorrow and our discussions tomorrow. And then as we take this and apply it to the work that we're doing every day. So we cannot thank you all enough for your time, your expertise, your perspective, your wisdom. This was such a great discussion that I wish we could just continue, because I'm sure we could stay here longer and learn so much more from you all. But I know my colleagues have been dropping links in the chat to some of the resources that you shared and you mentioned. So please take a look at those resources, reach out to us if you have any questions. But to our panelists, thank you so much. We appreciate you. We value your partnership and just really appreciate your wisdom and expertise on this. So appreciate it.